Hello and welcome, star people, to the Outlaw Astrology Podcast. I'm APM, your intrepid star guide, and a quick recap of our archetypal journey through astrology so far. We looked at the planets, the houses, the angles, the signs, and the nodal axis. And today's focus is going to be transits as an archetypal timing pattern to our lives. Before we get to that, some housekeeping. Follow us on Instagram, Pinterest, and YouTube. Those links are in the show notes. And please subscribe to the the Daily Stargazer newsletter for more of the daily transits that you might see in the sky today. Link in the show notes. And please like, subscribe, and particularly review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube because it helps others find us. And now, onward. Alrighty, so we're going to start with understanding transits as archetypal dialogues. And so, what are transits? And what they are quite simply is planets or points in motion activating natal chart points. So that means that, say, for example, you've got Venus in Pisces in direct motion hanging out in your 9th house. And say, for example, the Sun happens to be in Pisces. It is not currently in Pisces as of the recording of this podcast, but as per this example, it is Sun in Pisces. That Sun in Pisces is going to be activating that Venus in Pisces placement in the 9th house of the chart. And so that would be very mystical type experiences. One could expect the need for more compassion, in particular self-compassion, and the need toward being imaginative and fantastical. And so that energy would be probably leading to more frameworks, philosophical, mystical, magical frameworks, Need to reorient my body in space here. And that would be a focus. And the Sun would be about consciousness or rational thinking, that sort of thing. I would tend to think of it more as consciousness. Very broadly, a very polysemous word. Each person's going to have their own understanding of that. And I invite you to go with your understanding of it, because I think that will greatly help us all understand ourselves, our place in the cosmos, and to comprehend how we should navigate that world better. Okay, so transits are planets in motion, as I said, activating natal chart points, and transits can be seen as timing patterns. So when archetypal energies become more activated. And so you could see this as a dialogue between a transiting planet and a natal placement. As I've said, when we're looking at our transiting Sun in Pisces, activating a Venus in Pisces transit, and that's happening in a 9th house, we're going to be looking at frameworks. And I would say probably more indigenous frameworks based on the Piscean element. I'm thinking more dreamtime type energy. In a lot of indigenous belief systems, the dreamtime, or meaning the dream world, is not entirely, how do I describe this? It's different, but it's not seen as different, less than, or different, better than, simply a different state of consciousness, and in some cases seen as the consciousness, meaning that the waking world is seen as the illusion, and the dream world is seen as actual reality. I find that very provocative to think on and to try to embody as much as I can. And so you can consider a transiting planet in Pisces and a natal planet in Pisces to be that dialogue. And so the difference between inner planet transits is that they are shorter, and outer planet transits tend to be longer. That's very simply, and I understand I'm being very broad and basic, because the whole point of my energy here is that I am trying to provide an overview of things, because that's how I usually operate. I tend to look for overviews, and then I start adding coloring in points once I look at points and I think, okay, patterns. I start to see patterns from an overview. So if I'm looking at the big picture, I tend to see patterns, things of that nature in overview. And I can't see that sort of thing if I'm looking too far up close. So a short planet transits, meaning inner planet transits, it's more details. You're looking at the details up close, whereas outer planet transits are longer, and so there's a chance, an opportunity to get a big picture view and where those details might fall in line or fall within or without that big picture. It's like trying to put a puzzle together, and you have the box to act as your guide, the picture on the box to act as your guide, rather than having no picture on a box, and so you kind of have to wing it type of energy. That's what I mean. So when we're looking at key transit cycles and archetypal meanings, we're looking at lunar cycles, and that's our most familiar transit pattern. That happens every 2.5 to 3 days. You're going to have a new sign, and you can literally walk outside and look at the moon and have a conversation and a connection, because you can look up. Whereas Mercury, Venus, and Mars transits, they're personal archetypal activations. You can't see Mercury, Venus, and Mars. Yes, you can see them with the naked eye, but not the same clarity as you can see the moon. And so those transits are very personal. Your thinking will change. The way you communicate tends to change during Mercury transits. Your values will alter. How you harmonize or don't with others will change during Venus transits. Mars transits, which is about, motivation and how we assert ourselves, we're going to be very top of mind or top of consciousness during those types of transits. Now, outer planet transits and their profound life chapters is how we might see that. So a Jupiter transit, approximately about 12-year cycle, and it'll be about expansion and opportunities. Saturn transits are approximately 28, 29 years, and even as far as 30, depending on the chart. And that's about structure and maturation. Uranus transits are about 84-year cycle. Awakening and liberation would be the keywords there. Neptune transits, approximately 165-year cycle. Most of us are not going to have a Neptune return, as it were, because 165 years is a really long cycle for us currently. But dissolution and inspiration happen if we're looking at maybe squares or other shorter time aspects. Pluto transits, 240-year cycle approximately, transformation and empowerment. Also, Pluto returns not as common because we have not figured out how to live 250 years yet. So, those are more like profound life chapters. They are shifts in consciousness, is how we would see those. Now, transit aspects can be different archetypal energies, and they can interact during transit periods. So, like I said, if you've got Pluto, in evolutionary astrology, Pluto is considered the shadow. It is considered a planet of evolution because it is, as I said, about transformation and empowerment. It is considered a higher octave in an archetypal manner of Mars. Okay, so it is Mars energy writ large. And let's just say that it's having a chat with the moon. Well, that's going to be a very intense experience, because if we have known ourselves, for example, and we have the moon and Pluto in an archetypal, dance or symphony or something like that, it's going to be more intense because that's a very personal placement. Every 2 days, that's very personal in a chart. And that means our safety needs are going to alter when Pluto is adding transformation empowerment. We're going to experience loss, heartbreak, grief, because transformation is messy. Evolution is messy. It doesn't come without the cost of having to sometime pull us away from things that, even though they may not be the best for us, are safe and familiar And our safety and familiarity and comfort needs are going to undergo a transformation during a Pluto transit. And the moon stands for our instincts, our safety needs, how we feel nurtured and secure. So when we're looking at a transit aspect between Pluto and the moon, we're looking at intensity. It's going to feel intense. Also more passionate. We might find ourselves expressing our emotions with more intensity and passion, and it might feel a little bit safer to do so because we're talking about safety. So that means that our time with the moon and Pluto in a conversation, in a dialogue, which is an archetypal energy in and of itself, we're going to find ourselves being probably small talk will bother us at this point. Superficialities will annoy. Unexamined anything. People are just saying things and nothing is examined. That sort of energy tends to be very much like a pebble in the shoe when one is walking type of energy. It can create beauty, but it's often going to be through discomfort, which is why we usually don't want that. It's a very intense transit. So transit examples, for example, the most common ones you're going to hear are, for example, Saturn return. That is a transit example. Now, Saturn is not an inner planet. It is considered an outer planet because it has a 28-year cycle. But it's very famous because we all have what is called a Saturn return, unless, of course, your natal Saturn, meaning the Saturn in your birth chart, is retrograde, at which point that return is going to happen a lot faster at a different point in your life. It's going to happen pretty quickly after that return because a retrograde Saturn is going to have to transverse over the degree in the natal chart. And that is a return. So a person with a natal retrograde Saturn is going to have 2 Saturn returns, whereas most people only get one, which is the one at about between 28 and 30 years old. And that is a very famous Saturn return, a very famous transit. Why? Because it is at that point that our brain is now matured, because the brain matures about between the ages of 24 and 26. And so about 28 years we'll have walked out of our family homes if we're fortunate, or unfortunate, depending on how you choose to see that, but you now form independence. You've got your own values, your own perspective on things. And it's a maturation of, okay, this is what I think. This is what my family of origin believed, and this is what I believe. These are what my experiences tell me what is right, based on my values, and this is what the choices I would have made had I not had whatever experiences I've had before my 28th, 29th, or 30th birthdays. And so that's the most famous one. Now, other less notable, but not as well known, would be squares. And so if you're looking at Uranus, squares to Uranus, to Pluto, particularly the more close in, so we're looking like Uranus squares, things like that, Neptunian squares, outer planet squares, or sextiles in particular to any of these inner planets. And those type of energies is where we meet challenges. So if our natal Saturn, let's stick with Saturn, our natal Saturn happens to be in Pisces, and we had a Pisces return, we will also have a square to that that natal Saturn in Pisces, if it moves to, say, and it will, Saturn in Sagittarius. That is a squaring type of energy, and that is where one is about self-compassion and limits, because Pisces wants to help everybody, wants everybody to get helped, wants to feel compassion about everybody and everything, and Saturn's like, hold up, man, we don't have the energy for all of that. We are a human in a human body with a nervous system. We're going to have to curate. We're going to have to pick and choose. And I know that feels uncomfortable, but this is best for our energies to help us stay healthy and sane. So whom can we help given our unique challenges and strengths? What is a yes for us and what is a no for us? And that Saturn in Sagittarius square happens, and now we have to question the very framework on which we have built our relationship to boundaries. Because Saturn in Pisces is learning about boundaries. They don't yet have them. And so they're learning how to protect their energies and set boundaries, which is not a comfortable thing for Pisces, which is ruled by a boundary erasing Neptune, boundary dissolving Neptune. Neptune dissolves boundaries. That is what that's what it does. It doesn't erect them. And so you've got two energies that don't seem to be wanting to play nice with each other, having to do so in a natal chart. And here comes Saturn, transiting Saturn in Sagittarius, to bump up against all of that and say, hey, guess what? Perhaps the problem isn't just maintaining one's energy. Maybe the very beliefs that underpin these behaviors should be looked at. Should we call those in, look at them, and go, we need a big picture view. We need to know what we believe, why we believe it, and what frameworks we're using so that we can get a better idea of where we can make our adjustments. Because Saturn is about being mature and making adjustments. It's about also, when you put that Saturn and Neptune in energy with each other, it's about sacrificing. What can we let go of? What do we surrender in order to say yes to these things over here? Because we cannot say yes to all of it. Mutable energy wants it to be a yes all the time, and it's just not possible. So Saturn in Sagittarius is like, okay, all of these frameworks are fascinating. Which of them are in alignment with our values? Which of them are in alignment with our life experiences? Which of them are in alignment with who we are? Going up against that compassionate, idealistic, and a bit fantastical Saturn in Pisces. That's grounding mystical, the other world, the dream world, in a more practical and grounded way, so that Pisces energy is free to function in a more healthy manner. So, if we're going to look at, Uranus and Pluto were in a conjunction in Virgo once upon a time in the 60s, the late 60s in particular. And that was a time of the counterculture. Advocating for change, looking at society, critiquing it and saying, you guys are falling short, here are my thoughts on that. So that's an example, and it led to, it informed and shaped the consciousness of the 60s, which was the conformist, consumerist way that we had been living at that point was no longer viable. It could not continue. How can we make changes? And Virgo energy is all about pulling the pen out and the red pen out and going, okay, well, first of all, we're going to need to get rid of some of this stuff, and we're going to need to include these people, and that's not going to work, and this is not going to work. And so we saw the dissolution of, divorces started to be a thing. Previously, you couldn't, unless the other party wanted to get divorced. You had to wait or hope that they would agree with you. And as of 1969, in particular parts of the world, and some parts of the world, this is just not true what I'm saying. I'm talking about the West where I happen to reside. So in the West, we saw a lot of marriages falling apart. People were like, oh my God, the divorce rate is blah, blah, blah. No, that's not what happened, people. They're simply people that wanted to no longer be associated with other people, suddenly had the freedom to say bye, and did so. That's all that happened. And so when we're looking at Virgo energy is about editing and refining and being discerning. Okay, this doesn't work. We're going to need to make some changes. That's how that energy is. Uranus is about revelation. It's about awakening and liberation. People woke up and went, wow, I don't want to be married to you. I don't want to live this life anymore. How can I free myself? And Pluto is like, we're going to need to transform some things because none of this is really working. And everybody born at that time, stewing in those energies, felt empowered, 20 years later, to look around and go, you know what, the state of music, the state of culture is not working for me. What changes can I make? And so one of the people that has that particular placement in their chart is Kurt Cobain, who was born in 1967 and would and did have Uranus and Pluto conjunct in Virgo, and I believe he is also a Virgo rising. So that would be very much about his identity, which is quite fascinating. And so we're going to step forward a bit further and look at practical approaches. So I would suggest keeping a transit journal, and here's why. You want to track archetypal patterns in your daily life, because what we're looking for is experiences in your life. What experiences are informing, your experiences will inform how you see things. They will shape how you see things, and your feelings will as well. What choices, what decisions are you making? What feelings are you feeling during those choices and decisions? What's going on in the heavens? What's the moon doing? What's Mercury doing? What's Venus doing? Etc. Are you feeling less motivated? Is Mars in Cancer? Is Mars in Taurus? This might be a time to slow down. And if it's in Cancer, it might be a time to tune in with your feelings and lead with your gut, but do so with its discernment. And so that's why keeping a transit journal is helpful, is because there's always a lot going on a cosmic level, and a journal allows you to personalize it for yourself. So working with challenging transits can be difficult. And so a need for strategy for difficult times, which is why looking at the stars can be helpful. It's a lens. It's a philosophy. You can look and say, oh, look there. Mercury is retrograde. Okay, so I might want to watch what I say, or speak with discernment. Let's avoid watch what I say, because how are we going to do that all the time? But try to be as discerning as possible. Pause. Reflecting, is this something I should say right now, or should I wait for a better time? And if I can't wait for a better time, how can I say this kindly? For example, or Mars energy, which can be challenging. So when we're looking at transits, Mars and Saturn transits can be challenging because Mars energy is naturally challenging, and so is Saturn. A sign, you might think of them as like squares and oppositions in planetary form. And asserting oneself requires something to assert against, something to bump up against. And so Saturn energies are always looking for limits. And so during a Saturn transit, for example, there are delays, there are limits. You're very much aware of what challenges you natally face in your chart and what you're facing currently. Saturn is a taskmaster and is like, you should dot those I's and cross those T's and properly loop that D, because we want to make certain that what we mean to say is clear. So that's when I'm saying that. Think of a Mercury Saturn transit. Are you speaking with discernment? Are you being clear? Because if you're not dotting I's and crossing T's and making it clear that this is what you mean and this is what you meant to say, it's open to interpretation, and people are going to feel very free to interpret what your words according to their own values and life experience. And so if we got also Mercury retrograde and Saturn are in a transit together, and that is challenging. Saturn can be a challenging energy to work with, and now we have to watch what we say. We have to speak with discernment. We have to think with discernment. Did I mean to say that? Do I want to say that? Because retrograde action is this: an opportunity, an invitation to pause assumptions, to pause verbal impulsivity, and to go deeper and to ask, how can I say this kindly, or do I need to say this at all? So that would be one way to work with that type of energy during challenging transits. Now, if you're looking at Mercury, Mars, for example, and let's leave that retrograde Mercury with a direct motion Mars, and now we got how we assert ourselves, how we speak our minds, and what we speak up for, how we communicate. So when we got Mercury and Mars, that energy is going to be a bit more energetic, maybe even enthusiastic, and maybe misinterpreted as aggressive, because assertive can look aggressive depending on who is watching, who is observing. And so Mercury-Mars energy, especially if that Mercury is retrograde, do not speak in the height of emotion. Be discerning. If one is experiencing anger, take a moment to cool down before speaking. Because if we speak when we're emotional, particularly if it's like Saturn, Mercury and Mars energy, we might be in a height of emotion with our Mars. And taking a step back to calm down might invite us to ask the question, do I need to say this? And if I do need to say it, how can I say it in a way that is kind, as much as I can? Now, it doesn't mean that it's going to work out perfectly. I'm merely saying that you've done your due diligence. You've seen another person as a human being and tried your best to engage with that. How they choose to respond is outside of our purview. And the best we can do is to influence the only person we can influence, which is ourselves. That if we walk through the world in a way that is right for us and doesn't trod excessively, because you notice that I did not say no trotting. That's not possible. Here's the problem with that, is you did not intend to trod and someone believes you've trod on them, okay? That's a matter of perspective. So do the best that you can to live in alignment with who you are and your values, playing to your strengths and doing what you can to mitigate your challenges, whether it is to call in other people who are strong in places in ways that you are less strong, or it is to find ways to strengthen those places in which you have challenge because it interests you to do so. Okay? So working with challenging transits, and we're talking about Mars and Saturn transits in particular. We do not, and by we, I mean me, and I don't consider outer planets, meaning I don't consider Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto to be malefic planets. They're outside of that system. They came much later, and so were not included. I only consider up to Saturn who are dealing with benefic or malefic. And you don't even have to bother with that if you're not of interest. If it's not of interest to you, you can just drop that and keep walking. You take what I say and apply it to how you choose to practice astrology, how you walk your own magical, mystical path. Okay? And so when we're looking at using transits for timing decisions, you want to align actions with archetypal forces. So, as I've said, you got Mercury retrograde, and you got it in aspect to Mars. And in archetypal astrology, we don't break down as much into sextiles, etc. You can if you want to add an extra level of discernment and detail. But Mercury-Mars energy, in and of itself, is going to have a challenge to it, because Mars energy needs something to butt up against in order to troubleshoot, in order to find a resolution, meaning there's going to be a challenge. How you communicate, how you think is going to be altered. It's going to be challenged. You might say something about, and someone says, oh, that's not true, according to their experience. The problem with that's not true is that There is very little in this world, and I would go so far as to say nothing, that is fixed, absolute, and universally true. So, that's not true is, in my opinion, a thought-terminating cliche statement made by someone. It's not true for them, so naturally they assume that it's also not true for everybody else. And so during a Mercury-Mars connection in the stars, you're going to meet up with you saying what you want to say because it feels true for you, and other people going, well, that's not true, or that's not true for them. That's what they mean. They're not saying that, but that's what they mean. And so that's when we talk about aligning action. So we're talking about the sun. Sun is going to be the opportunity to expand one's consciousness. And if Neptune is alongside for the ride, all those boundaries, ego, all of that stuff is going to be dissolved with Neptunian experiences. And if we've got the moon having a chat with Uranus, and we're looking at awakening and liberation, what you feel safe, what felt secure previously, when Uranus joins the conversation, it's suddenly not going to work anymore. We are now open to more Uranus experiences, more something awoke us. And if it's, Uranus is retrograde, it'll be more, okay, let me pause and reflect. Something is altered within me. If it's not retrograde, and we don't have to look deeper, then we can look outside and go, okay, I'm looking at a pattern outside of me that seems to suggest change. How can I better respond? And if we're looking at Venus in a transit, and let's say that it's having a nice little chat with, let's go with Neptune, because I just like that idea. Our values are becoming very shape-shifty, very fluid. They're dissolving. What we thought we mattered to us, what we thought we valued, suddenly not so much. Or how we used to harmonize with others, and what we thought was beautiful, for example. And how we attracted is suddenly dissolving and getting very confusing. We're disenchanted. We're disillusioned. And being disenchanted and disillusioned is not necessarily a bad thing, especially if you're waking up from a really bad illusion. You're enchanted in a way that was not beneficial for you or those around you. Then those disillusions being dissolved, those enchantments being dissolved, is ideal, and that's what Neptune does. And also more of a spiritual bent. So Venus will be leaning more toward the mystical, the spiritual, that which cannot be seen, that which cannot be quantified, and yet is just as valid. I said valid, I didn't say factual. It means that you find a more real way to be that may not be scientifically validated as of yet. Okay? And so the art of dealing with, participating with, consciously with transits rather than being driven by them. The whole point is planets do not dictate fate or destiny. That is still a choice, personally, that we all have. And so keeping that top of mind when participating, engaging consciously with transits is you're keeping a journal, you're being conscious. If you're asking questions, I noticed this is what's going on with the stars. Oh, Neptune is hanging out on my sun or on my Venus. No wonder my values are shifting. Oh, Neptune is hanging out on my Mars, and I'm finding myself not being as grr as I used to be, and I'm finding myself being more empathetic to people, even though those people might be annoying. They used to annoy me, but now I can kind of see their point and kind of be more empathetic and keep calm and keep, sweet, as it were. And that's how you can, one of the ways in which you can engage. Now, some of the transit seasons, when to plant, when to harvest, when to rest, is a bit more of a challenge. And I think that's more personal. It's not something that someone can tell you. For example, let's use the moon. The moon is most known for seasons. And so you'll have waxing energy, meaning new moon, waxing crescent, first quarter moon, waxing gibbous, full moon, waning gibbous, last quarter moon, waning crescent, back to the new moon. Now, all the waxing energy is you're starting to plant. at the at the full moon, you're starting to harvest. When to rest, the third quarter going on to the waning crescent is resting energy. Okay? So I would say that that works mostly when we're talking about the moon. That's when you would look at when to plant, when to harvest, and when to rest, and you would be looking at any planets, and I mean any of them, that would be in a conversation with the moon at that time. And this is just a very generalized, very broad way of looking at this, because there are people who don't feel like they want to harvest at a full moon. They prefer to do it maybe at a new moon or some other place in the moon's moon phase and moon cycle. So that's more of a personal choice and a preference rather than a necessary need. So responding, and that's developing archetypal awareness during intense transits. So there's responding and reacting. Responding requires a step back and then an action, what you choose to do. Whereas reacting is instinctive, it is immediately, it's impulsive. And so we want to respond, meaning with intentionality, as opposed to reacting, which is more, someone said something and I reacted. I just said what I said and now I have to fix a rupture. Who wants that? Let's avoid. So, some of the key insights here is that transits can be archetypal in timing in our lives. And so with a transit journal, which is what I'd suggest, practical application, you can identify your most significant current transit by looking at your chart and making a comparison, okay? So I would suggest, keep a journal, or even just take notes on a voice app or whatever feels most comfortable for you based on how your nervous system is wired, and run with that and see what happens. Call to action here. We have the daily Stargazer newsletter for these transit insights. We have a free and a paid version. Link in show notes. And next episode, this actually completes our archetypal series, as this is episode 10. So check on our Pinterest and YouTube to keep abreast of what we're doing, and thank you very much for listening and hanging in here with us. We appreciate you. I appreciate you. And until next time, peace and astro magic, star people.